On their return, the apostles told him all that they had done. And he took them and withdrew apart to a town called Bethsaida. When the crowds learned it, they followed him, and he welcomed them and spoke to them of the kingdom of God and cured those who had need of healing. Now the day began to wear away, and the 12 came and said to him, "Send the crowd away to go into the surrounding villages and countryside to find lodging and get provisions, for we are here in a desolate place." But he said to them, "You give them something to eat." They said, "We have no more than 5 loaves and 2 fish, unless we are to go and buy food for all these people," for there were about 5,000 men. And he said to his disciples, "Have them sit down in groups of about 50 each." And they did so, and had them all sit down. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing over them. Then he broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples to set before the crowd. And they all ate and were satisfied. And what was left over was picked up, 12 baskets of broken pieces. This is the word of the Lord.
We're in part 7 of our series called Mercy. And today we're going to look again at this famous passage, Luke chapter 9, on the feeding of the 5,000. And in many ways, this is essentially a kind of continuation of last week's message. And, if you weren't here last week, let me at least give you a quick recap of last week's message. In the first part, I just went straight after this question. Do you believe? It's a question of faith. Do you believe that this person that we're dealing with can take something that seems so small, 5 loaves and 2 fish, to feed an impossible number of people, 5,000? And actually, as I said last week, it was probably more like 20,000 plus. That was the first question. The second question I raised from this passage was, whose work is it? Whose work is it? If we go out there, and this is a series on mercy, the need and the brokenness around us is tremendous. It seems like an endless need, an impossible need. And here in this passage, you can hear the disciples. I mentioned this last week. They said, well, if we had, I referenced the other reading of this story is told multiple times for emphasis. If there was 200 denarii, and I said that's probably in today's modern dollars would be something like $75,000, $80,000, at least in Silicon Valley wages. And, they wouldn't even have enough even just to give them a little bit. How are we going to, what are we doing here? And what I was saying to you last week is if you believe this will lead to an obedience of how we do God's work in God's way. That this is not just some kids' Sunday school story, but this is meant for adults. This is meant for mature Christians. It's going to actually take mature Christians to believe in something like this. But if we will find out that this thing that we're supposed to go do, as Jesus explicitly says, you go give them something to eat, which is really strange because, as I pointed out last week, the disciples, it's not their money. They don't have any money. It's not their bread or fish. They get this from a kid. And yet Jesus says, you give them something to eat. And all they basically get to do is what I like to put is they got to be the waiters. They got to organize the crowd and pass out the food, essentially. But what they do get to see is they get to see their faith become sight. That's what they get to see. Their faith becomes sight right before their eyes. And they see that, in one sense, they're supposed to give something to eat, but it is God who's actually doing that work. And in that, in that process where you just get this tiny little portion, you get to see the greatness of God, the glory of God, experience it yourself right there. And that's what I want to. That's where I want to shift into today. one of the things that I really want to emphasize, as I knew that I was going to preach on this, I knew I was going to explicate the passage one week, and then the second week, essentially, I just wanted to illustrate this. And I want to illustrate it in a way, I told you a story last week about a guy who began following the Lord and started offering a provision for multitudes with very little. And that was one of my spiritual heroes, Brother Andrew, who smuggled Bibles into communist Eastern Europe in the middle of the 20th century. But even that, I could have told you other stories of things from 100 years ago or 200 years ago or 1,000 years ago. But even that, I was thinking about this, even as I was giving that illustration last week, I was thinking, gosh, the millennials don't even know what the heck communism is. I mean, I'm old enough, I know what it is. I mean, not like as a historical idea, but I lived in it. I lived during that era. And, and a lot of people, at least in this church, who come from Korean descent, it's a very personal thing. I mean, our families, some of the people in this church, my own personal family, they are living in communist tyranny even to this day. So, that's a very personal story. But what I want to do for the rest of today's message is I've entitled to, last week I called the message The Impossible Provision. Today I'm calling it The Impossible Provision Today, not 1950s or 1960s or 1850s, but today. And I wanted to tell to you of things that our own church knows. Right. And I know that I talk about Bishop a lot, but I've never quite talked about it like this. What we tell you usually is what we see at Bishop and what has happened. But what I haven't told you so much about is how it has been provided for. What has been some of the impossible provision that God has done with our 5 loaves and 2 fish? I mean, because that's essentially, in our church, for those of you who don't know, Bishop is our mission to a Native American reservation on the other side of the mountains. And we started off with a little more than 5 loaves and 2 fish, but not much more. And the work is for thousands. It's for thousands. And you can only run off to do this thing if you believe this passage. If you believe this passage and the way that we're trying to do it. So we've been at Bishop now for 8 years. I'm working in that ministry. And our church operates in that ministry out of a Luke 9 type of faith, feeding the multitudes kind of faith. And so let's get into that in 3 parts. Part one, vision and calling beget faith. Okay? Vision and calling. You must see something. And you must see something not through the eyes of our money or what's there. I mean, in one sense, whatever is there to start with, which is too little, if that's all you see, you're not seeing anything. You have no vision. You must see, through the lens of this passage, because this is sort of like the glasses that help you see the real reality. Vision and a calling from God to see according to the vision, that begets faith. That's part 1. Part 2, faith begets faith. I mean, beget is an old word. It means to birth, okay? Faith begets faith, which begets provision. Do you guys hear that? That's part 2. Faith begets more faith, which in turn begets provision. And then, part 3, I want to talk about Christ, the endless bread of God. He's the greatest provision, right? Christ, the endless bread of God. So let's get into this. And to get in, let me. I have a PowerPoint here I want to offer you. Can we throw that up there? So the impossible provision today, and part 1, vision and calling begets faith. And in order to show you a little something, you have to kind of see this from a little bit of a bigger picture. And there was a calling for us from God, and we didn't quite see it. It took some time to see the vision of what God wanted out of Bishop. And in order to present this, so it's this vision, and it was a calling, and it's this vision out of which has birthed a lot of faith. And out of that faith, which begets more faith, which is then pour forth incredible provision. Right? So let's get into this. All right. In order, if you could get that light here, at least the one of them. There we go. This is just a map of California, and you just got, for those of you who've never gone, it's just helpful to just orient where we are. This is the Bay Area. Here we are. This is the Sierra Nevada mountains. This area right here is called the Owens Valley. This is the area that we're talking about. All along this route right here, you see this route? That's Highway 39. It's sort of like effectively, this is Highway 5. We take it up and down, north and south of California. If you live on this side of the mountains, you take the 395. Okay, so this is Bishop. Let's just get a little closer here. You can see this is areas called the Eastern Sierra, and some people call this the Eastern Sierra. We call it if you're from there, you know it's the Owens Valley. Let's center it. This is Bishop. This is the town right in the middle. This is an unbelievably gorgeous area, and now I want to just take your eyes to this. This is Bridgeport, Lee Vining. Just north of here is Mammoth, very famous skiing. And just south is a town called Big Pine, Independence, Lone Pine, and out here is Death Valley. The reason I point all these things out to you is because there's a reservation right next to Bishop, but that's not the only place where Native Americans are. Really, there are Native Americans here, here, here. They're all various forms of Paiutes, and some Paiute and some Shoshone, different tribes of Paiutes. And the largest one is here is in Bishop, and then Big Pine, Independence, Lone Pine, and then even out here, I don't even know where exactly it is out there, somewhere in Death Valley, okay? One more. You can see a little bit closer. Benton is the closest, and then Lee Vining goes up here, Mammoth. You can't see it up here, it's Bridgeport. Big Pine, Independence, Lone Pine. Famous or infamous, you might want to put it, is the Japanese internment camp where they, in World War II, when our country essentially imprisoned Japanese folks because of the racist policy at the time. That's right here. It's right there. You can go see it on that drive. Okay. So actually, let's go back one more time. Let's go back. Sorry. I'm going to leave this right up here. Now, the reason I'm pointing this out to you is it took some time to learn this, maybe about the first year or so, second year or so. And just the way this started, the first year we went out to Bishop was 2010. The team was about, how big was it, Frank? Maybe 50? Yeah, 2000, maybe not even. I think it was like, so it was a small team, 30, maybe, I want to say about 10 from the 10 or 20 from the CAM and 10 or 20 from the youth. Does that seem right? So maybe 30, maybe 40 max. They went out in multiple cars. They slept on the floor inside the church, and they brought their sleeping bags. They brought some food, and then they bought food in town. That was our 5 loaves and 2 fish. We had a woman who did haircutting. I think a nurse came. There was a VBS. And we got a lot of rejection from Native Americans. They're like, who are you? And what are you weird Asian folks doing here? And where are you from? Where? San Jose? Right? And that was the 5 loaves and 2 fish. What the team came back was there was fruit. Some kids came and were saved. And it offered a kind of hope. But when we came back, the team came back. There were 2 key leaders actually. One was at the time, his name is Kyung Park, Deacon Kyung. He was a deacon. Today he's one of our elders. And the other one was actually our member Jane's dad, and he passed away from heart failure. But he was the other key leader of the team at the time. And they came back, and they saw amazing things, but they also came back, and they mostly felt lack. They mostly felt lack. You guys hearing what I'm saying here? You're looking at 5 loaves and 2 fish. You're looking at thousands of people. The Son of God looks at you and says, you go give them something to eat. Your basic reaction is, with what money? And what are you talking? That is exactly what the disciples said, right? It's what the story said. I mean, it's in some of the other verses. Is Philip. These guys are. Well, if we had this much money, it's so they get this much. Okay. And what I want to just point out to you is, we began studying this. In 2010, they came back. One of the lack was a fairly simple lack. We don't speak enough English. We don't speak enough English. And since we don't speak enough English, it's hard to build relationships with Native Americans, since a lot of us mostly speak Korean, and so it's hard to connect with them since we don't speak English well enough. And so one of the first things Deacon Park did was he asked me, is the English congregation going anywhere on short-term mission? He asked this me in the following year, 2011. And I said, we don't have a plan to. He says, would you go to Bishop? So I'm going to tell you a very personal story about this. He said, he asked me to go, and I said, let's talk about it later. And then I prayed about it, and here's what my prayers were. I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. No. What? Why? Oh, come on. Jesus, you know how this is going to go. I'm going to jump into this thing, and because I'm the pastor, over time, a lot of the work is going to get shifted to me. I don't want to do it. That was basically plus, it's like, come on. The needs on the reservation are so huge. And what is our little church in San Jose with a bunch of Koreans going to do for those people over there where the needs are overwhelming? That's more or less what I said in my prayers. You know what I'm saying? I'm basically saying exactly what the disciples said in this passage. There's thousands of people. You go, and you know what Jesus basically said to me? You go give them something to eat. Oh, come on. And I'm not saying this to you because I have faith. I'm telling this to you because I did not have faith. But I know this passage. Okay? So I did not have faith, but unfortunately, or fortunately, I know this passage. And I know that God tells you to do absurd things, and you must do God's work God's way, and you must go by faith, not by sight. By sight, my answer was no. But when Jesus tells you to do something, you're just like, oh gosh. So then I told Deacon Park, okay, let's go do it. And so then that's the calling. That's the calling. From the calling, here are some of the things we began. So I just went out there. The first year I went there, I said, what the heck are we doing? We better learn something, because what are we doing out here, Jesus? That was mostly my question my first year of the trip. Everybody else is running around doing ministry. I'm basically going, what the heck are we doing out here? And so I'm basically in a learning expedition. Here are some of the things I found out. It isn't because I was so smart. There's a woman there who's a key leader. Her name is Janice. She handed me a book of how the church there, the Valley Presbyterian Church, was planted by a missionary. I read that thing, and I read that thing, and I read that thing. I read it 7, 8, 9, 10 times. I just had this sense the Holy Spirit was dropping this thing into my hand. And it told of a story of a guy named William Price. He's a missionary in the 1800s. He came into this valley. He came into Bishop right here. And there are Paiute Native Americans all around there. He went, they were playing poker or something like this. And who is this crazy guy? And they were drunkards and gamblers. Not a whole lot's changed, you can see. Right? And they pretty much rejected him. And he came in here, and he began preaching the gospel. Here's what I found out. So, if you don't think this is about multitudes, I want to tell you a little something. Okay, so this is a bishop. Here are the numbers from what I know. There are about 2,000 members of the Bishop tribe, and about 1,600 of them live on the reservation, okay? But you think, okay, well, that's big enough, isn't it? Not to Jesus. Right here. If you go right here, this is Big Pine. This is the ones that we just knew of that first year. Deacon Park told me about these guys, and then he also knew there's a reservation. He heard somewhere there's a reservation here. Big Pine has about 600 members, about 500 residents. If you go down here to Lone Pine, I was looking at about 350 Native Americans live on that reservation. I was trying to figure out how many members. It's kind of interesting. They have more members than necessarily the people who live on the reservation. According to one website, they have about 1,400 members. I'm not sure if I entirely believe that number, but I think that 350 living on the reservation. So now we got 1,600 living here, 2,000 members, 500, 300. Independence is pretty small. They have about 100 people living there. You go up to Benton up here. There's about 100. It's like if you blink, you will miss Benton. That's almost not even an exaggeration. You will drive there. If you blink, you will miss it. Okay, you missed it. You missed the reservation. Where was it? Okay, you missed it. Okay, but 100 people whom God loves live there. It gets even more interesting. You go up. If you go up further up here, Lee Vining, there's a Native American community here. If you go back here, up here, Bridgeport has 100 members, about 50 residents. You start adding all these numbers up, you're pushing around, you're talking about 3,000 Native Americans just right around here. And then it gets even more and down here. You go give them something to eat. Who are we talking about here? The 30 or 40 or 50 people who show up at church when we have an event, or 100 people who show up when we have an event? Who are we talking about here, Jesus? I don't think that's what he's talking about. He's talking about the several thousand Native Americans running around here. And one of the things we saw is that this is the most important location. This is the most important location right here. And this is why I think the Lord wanted us to revive that church. And that's vision, okay? So let's go to part 2. You can turn that off now, Frank. Faith begets faith, which begets provision. I'm going to just tell you a few stories. I'll tell you the easy one first. Some of you are thinking about money. So there was a few $1,000s budgeted for that. I don't even know what was. I think they had only had $2,000 or $3,000 in their budget for this the first year. And so then the Korean-speaking ministry rallied. They did a number of fundraisers, and then, I don't know, they went from 3,000 to 5,000, and that kind of paid for it. Okay, you still have to have food, and then you have to have people drive out there. They took a bunch of different cars. Everybody went out. And then the following year, we took even more cars because we took more kids, and then a number from the English congregation also went. So the team went from something like 30 to 60. And the dollars went from something like 3,000, 4,000 to 6,000, 7,000, something like that, right? And it was budgeted the following year. They bumped that budget up, okay? But I won't tell you, but you got to about, I can't remember what year it was. I want to say about 2012. And when you guys got to that point, we had a new lead pastor on the Korean-speaking side. And the previous years, we had retired folks on the Korean-speaking side. And we said, we have a need, and there are all these kids who are going to go out there, and they, of course, can't drive. And so some of them were retired. Some of them took days off from work. Some took days off from work because it's a whole day drive just to get there. Then you got to sleep, and then a whole day drive to get back. Because you're going to go through the mountains. It's going to take you 6 to 7 hours minimum. And so there are these hilarious stories where, an elderly gentleman in our church has got he would take his SUV and he's got 6 kids, and one of the kids would throw up in the mountains. And that's what it was like. And we had all these kids driving out there, but our next pastor took a look at that, and it was beautiful because they would go there, then they would sleep, and then they would come back. But it was beautiful to see all the people. See, faith begets faith. and you provide drivers. Huh? So that's basically where we went. But some of you you're interested in the money question. Okay, so just to give you an idea what this starts to look like. So Pastor Yoon looked at all those cars driving back and forth through the mountains, and up to that point, Deacon Park, who's running the ministry, he felt like this is all we got. We only have this X thousands of dollars. I can't ask for more than that. Whatever we're going to do, we have to do with this X thousands of dollars. Pastor Yoon apparently knows Luke chapter 9, because he pretty much said, no, that's not how we're going to do it. He says, what do you mean? This is all we have. So he's operating by sight. I'm not trying to criticize Deacon Park, but this is how we all tend to do things. Pastor Yoon said, he looked at this and he knew this couldn't be God's will. And when I turned to him, I said, well, why can't we just do it the other way where all these people drive through the mountain? It's kind of beautiful, you know, that they sacrifice their time and energy. And Pastor Yoon just looked straight at me. He says, you know, Pastor Park, he said, if one of those cars gets into an accident in the mountains and a couple of our kids get hurt, he said, that's the end of the mission trip. It's it. We can't do it this way. And our church is excited about this thing. There's a lot of people who want to contribute to this. We can't do it this way. We need a bus. And so Deacon Park did a little research, found out that the bus costs $6,000. That was nowhere in the budget. It just doesn't, there's no that money. So Pastor Yoon said, well, let's ask our people. So I still remember when this happened. He was going to go up, stand up in front, and explain the situation, announce we need $6,000. Some of the other deacons on the council came up to me and said, Pastor Park, I don't know if we're going to get $6,000. So could you also ask the English-speaking congregation, and maybe they will also give a special offering, and we can get to that $6,000. I said, that sounds good. I'll do that. We'll make the same appeal in the English-speaking congregation, and hopefully some of our members will contribute too. The following week, $7,000 just rolled straight in. Boom, right just like that. And they didn't even need our money in the English-speaking congregation. And ever since then the budget went from, and it's just like the budget. Last year, okay, the last 2 years, that budget, because we keep doing more things, because we keep feeding more people. Last year, that budget was at $25,000. So that's just the money. Okay, so the money. You go out there and you begin to feed more people. You know, our team went from 30 to 60. At the peak, there was like 120 something people. I think last year we had like more like 80 something. Right? But our church, this is getting interesting. You know that our church, fewer people from our church are going. I don't know if you know that. Some people are like, been there, done that, the bishop thing. They don't seem as excited about it. But you know, so number one, the money. Two, which is the people that we need. You know what's happened? Somehow stories gotten out that our church has this multi-year mission to try to reach powerfully Native Americans all through up and down that valley, and other churches want to jump into this thing. And so last year we had 4 churches, not just ours, but 3 other churches. And it gets even more interesting than that. You get to the reservation, and because now people know us and they trust us, they jump into the things that we do. We offer a ministry there. So one of the deacons on the Korean-speaking side who was on the handy team, so he's going, we don't have enough people to go paint this person's house or mow their lawn. And so he was going, I don't know how we're going to do this. So there's only like 3 of us guys. How are we going to go do this on this team? And so they turned to like 3 or 4 of these, there's 3 or 4 of the younger guys on the who have faith. They said, we'll help you. They just jumped right in there, did 2/3 of the work, boom, just like that. They were just blown away. We had this barbecue. These 2 younger guys, they literally, it was 103-degree heat that day, and they're standing in front of a grill, and they were like, no, you guys don't have to do it. We will grill. I mean, they're probably dealing with 115-degree heat for like 3 hours, okay? And they just jumped into it. Faith begets faith, which begets provision. And over time, we begin to ask Native Americans if they would like, we want to give them some more piece of ministry since we can't be there all the time. So we asked them to come to our youth retreat, but then we knew that was going to max out. Like this year, we think we can only probably handle about 6 kids. So then we're looking around for a way to do it. The Lord provided a partner there too. And so there's a woman there named Larissa Craig, and she runs a youth camp retreat in Benton, which is just 40 minutes north. So this is all these things the Lord provides the people. First the funds, then the people. By the way, the people are way more important than the funds, the money. A lot of people think the money is what makes ministry work. It's just a thing. The people are 10 times, 100 times more important than the money. All right. Something else. We don't know how to connect to Native Americans. We're so used to being in our own little Asian cliques that we don't know how to cross other cultures. So you know what we need? What we need is a heart to be willing to even try to do it. And then we need to get some know-how. So guess what? The Lord provided that too. So then each year we challenged our people to try different forms of training. So just at the beginning, this was the challenge. We had old folks on the Korean-speaking side, and then we had some not as old folks on the English-speaking side, and then we had young kids in the youth, and then because our children's pastor insisted that 9-year-old kids have to go on this mission trip too, so we were like, okay, so we're going to figure out how we're going to form just a unity on a team that has 8-year-olds up to 75-year-olds, and they don't even speak the same language. So that was what it was like. And so the pastors would, especially like Frank and I, would brainstorm some crazy cockamamie scheme on how to get all these people to work together. And then we would have to tell them things like, you're a father, you're not just some dude on a team, you're a father and these kids are your sons and daughters, because we have to be a family, because we have to show them the family of God when we go on the reservation. That's how it started. And then each year, we ramped this thing up. So here's what's going on now. In the last couple of years, so about 4 years ago, we sent these multi-generational teams to an elderly care homes. You know what Frank and I did this, and you know what we were thinking? Pastor Frank and I did this, and afterwards we're thinking like, the whole time I'm thinking like, oh, please don't let this completely flame out. We are going to crash and burn and totally flame out. We're going to send like, 60-year-old Koreans with like 14-year-old Korean Americans and Chinese kids to minister to a whole bunch of white folks in an elderly care home in the middle of San Jose, and that thing's going to totally flame out. They came back like glowing. They came back glowing and said, "Can we go back?" I was like, I'm thinking like, it's like maybe. I didn't say anything, but the following year, I just went right for the jugular. We started, okay, all right, let's send them into some other ethnic in ministry. Because the dream was, how do you go reach a reservation? But we began to realize there are other reservations, that San Jose is its own crazy reservation. So here's where some of our teams have gone. This is training, just learning. We're just trying to learn how to do this, how God provides. So our teams have gone to a Vietnamese church, a Mexican-Vietnamese after-school program. They've helped an Indian multi-ethnic church with their VBS. They've gone out to Fresno to work with the Hmong, H-M-O-N-G, Hmong, a ministry reaching them. And we've done Afghan soccer camp. And you know what our people say after they come back? Not always, but a lot of them, they come back looking for more. All this starts with 30 kids. I mean, not kids, but a team of 30 with a few $1,000s. That's our 5 loaves and 2 fish in 2010. And this thing is just blowing up and growing. And lastly, I'll just close with this one before I go to the final portion of the message. We've been praying for years that we could raise up a pastor and missionary who would be there the whole time. And he would be the new version of William Price. We're essentially looking for an Asian William Price. There is a brother, he's a Korean-American pastor, about my age, a real seasoned pastor. Lots of experience going overseas. He and his family are very much praying about this possibility. And so when we started this thing, how are we going to get them a pastor? If this guy says, yes, look where it has gone. There's a whole new William Price. And after he gets there, and then there's a revived church, that will start to reach they'll reach thousands. And it started with 5 loaves and 2 fish kind of provision. See? This is kind of what it looks like. With Brother Andrew, it was one guy in a VW Beetle. Can you imagine? A VW doesn't have much trunk space. Stuffing Bibles and then crossing the border into Poland, into Russia. And today, I don't even know how many people are in that ministry, and they're now going to Muslim countries. They're going into China. Not one man, I don't know, hundreds of people. Translating the Bible into all these different, this is what they do. It started with the 5 loaves of one guy in a VW Beetle. Let me close this message this way. There is a bread of God. In the Gospel of John, Jesus calls himself numerous things. I am the good shepherd. He says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. But he also says, I am the bread of life. When people meet, when they come into a church, they see a building. They see a small number of people. This is larger than a Chinese house church, by the way. This doesn't look like a big church, but there's house churches in China smaller than this. And they hear about some provision, about some guy named Jesus. And Jesus is the bread of life. That's what he calls himself. You know what they see by sight? They see less than 5 loaves and 2 fish. They see less than 5 loaves and 2 fish. Now, I'm a historical scholar. If I wasn't a pastor, I would have loved to just been a historian or a history professor, because I find history endlessly fascinating. Do you know that in 1850, the first missionary went to Uganda? In 1850, there were no Christians. Do you know how many Christians there are in Uganda today? You know how many? It's like millions. Uganda is not a small country. Something like 40% of the population professes Christ. In 1850, nobody professed Christ. You see how this works? This is 5 loaves and 2. But that loaf starts off, and that bread is not bread, because bread is the thing that we eat when we're hungry. And there's a bread that we must eat, which fills far more than our stomach. It fills an infinite chasm of our soul. And that bread is Jesus. We proclaim this message. It's not even, it's weird. It's a bread you eat through your ear. Does that sound strange? And it is a message about a bread which looks like very little, and is proclaimed by some foolish guy up front, and people hear it through the ear, and they eat this bread into an infinitely hungry chasm of their soul. And this bread named Jesus, broken on a cross, doesn't look like much. It looks like very, very little. And people receive this bread, and they know that they have received an eternal bread. And then they take their bread, whether it's food or whether it's money whether it's their time or whether it's their talent. And they know they have eaten the infinite eternal bread. And things like money and time and talent are worthy to give so that other people can have that bread and receive that mercy, receive that grace. The infinite eternal bread, Jesus Christ, is an endless, never-ending provision for the people who believe. Let's pray.